Live from Washington, I'm Aisha Tanzim and you're watching Access Point. The Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's visit to the U.S. was called unusually comprehensive and as media visit as we could hope for by senior U.S. administration officials. Both sides claim to have held frank and open discussions. They also claim that this visit was part of an ongoing process. But both sides also admit that there are challenges. So what are these challenges and how is this relationship going to move forward? Let's find out. Our first guest is Michael Kugelman. He is the Senior Program Associate for South and Southeast Asia at the Wilson Center. We also have Shuja Nawaz. He is the Director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. He is also the author of Crossed Swords, Pakistan, Its Army, and the Wars Within. Gentlemen, welcome to Access Point. So first question first, what are your impressions about the whole visit?
I think it went much better than anyone expected. It was put together after an attempt at a sideline meeting at the UN, which I think quite appropriately the Pakistani Prime Minister thought would not do because he wanted to have a much more substantive engagement. And it was a very hectic visit, but he had brought a very good team. And it appears that the US government went out of its way to make sure that it had put the A-team together for the visit. So there were a lot of substantive meetings with very substantial topics that were discussed.
And just to add that senior administration officials bragged about that every senior USG official, US government official that had anything to do with energy or security met the Pakistani team.
Including the Vice President.
Including the Vice President. What do you think about this visit, Michael?
I think the very fact that it happened is an achievement in of itself, given how bad things were between these two countries just less than a year ago. 2011 was a terrible year for the relationship. 2012, a good part of that year was bad as well. So the fact that you have these two leaders meeting for more than an hour, perhaps almost
more than 2 hours.
More than 2 hours.
Yeah.
The fact that they discussed essentially every issue under the sun, certainly security issues, but also cooperation on technology, on agriculture, so many issues. And then after that, they meet and they have a joint press conference in which they both are very jovial, exuding goodwill. They're joking about enjoying each other's cuisine. President Obama, of course, was asked by Nawaz Sharif to visit Pakistan afterwards. So the fact that all of this happened given how bad things had been in recent years and in recent months, I think that's something to be to point to as a success.
Okay, now let's talk about what both sides admitted were challenges. They said we both put our concerns on the table, we fleshed them out, but there are challenges. What are some of these challenges?
Well, there is still an abiding mistrust. The abiding mistrust relates to domestic issues in Pakistan, particularly U.S. role within the country and in the neighborhood. On Afghanistan, there have been past instances where the U.S. has suspected Pakistan of playing a double game, of trying to separate the Taliban from the good Taliban who don't attack the Pakistani military to the bad Taliban who do attack the Pakistani military. I think in the private meetings, based on what one has learned from senior administration officials, Prime Minister Sharif was very candid that there will no longer be this differentiation. He's also been very candid that despite advice from his civilian and military advisors to hedge his bets a little bit, he has opened up to President Karzai of Afghanistan, trying to persuade him that he means business when he says that he doesn't want anything but a stable Afghanistan.
Okay, and this is a very interesting point. You're saying that the Pakistani Prime Minister is saying, my military advised me to hedge bets, but I'm not doing it?
Not just the military. There were people on the civilian side, too, that told him to be careful about how far he went in relationships with both India and with Afghanistan. And his own instincts have guided him into trying to be much more open in those relationships. The question now is whether that will help Afghanistan.
Michael, what do you think? Will it help Afghanistan? And again, this question always comes up in the context of Pakistan. If the Prime Minister is being more open than he's being advised, then how is his relationship with the military going to suffer?
Well, this is a big question. The civil-military question has always been a big one ever since Nawaz Sharif came to power, obviously because of his past and the fact that he pushed back and lost his job for it when he last ran Pakistan, when he was last prime minister in the 1990s. But look, there's still a lot of challenges, a lot of tensions that these two countries are going to be facing in the Afghanistan context. Certainly drones being one of them. For as long as the United States continues to have troops in Afghanistan, it's going to keep using drones. Even though it's decreased the number, the frequency of drones, it's going to keep using them because the U.S. government sees them as essentially the only available and effective policy to be used against Pakistan-based militants that target troops in Afghanistan. And Nawaz Sharif did what he had to do from a domestic political point of view. He registered his disapproval. He said that he asked President Obama to end those strikes, but nothing is really going to happen beyond that.
Shuja, I was in a meeting, not in a meeting, in a briefing call with former U.S. Ambassador Cameron Munter, and he pointed out that it may be possible, he's not saying what the administration's doing, but it may be possible for U.S. to scale back the drones while Pakistan's talking to the TTP. Do you have a sense that the U.S. might consider it even if they don't officially accept it?
Well, the reality is that the drone strikes have been diminishing from the height of 2011, 2010, 2011, they've been diminishing, and they will diminish as the coalition presence in Afghanistan goes down to near zero in 2014. If there is an agreement between the United States and Afghanistan, a security agreement, then there may be anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 US troops remaining. And so there will probably be a fair amount of activity guided against them, some from Pakistani territory, by people that Pakistan can't control. So the drones will continue to some extent, but as we've already seen from the leaked reports that appeared
in the Washington Post.
Interestingly, the day after Prime Minister Sharif left Washington, so good timing, whoever wanted to affect this relationship, that there has been cooperation, there's been some sharing of targeting information, and there are practical ways in which the US and Pakistan can actually work on targeting without the US risking that Pakistan will warn the other guys, and without Pakistan seeing that the US was acting behind its back.
And this thing about Pakistan warning the other guys, Michael, that's been at the bottom of the mistrust. We hear the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, now according to the Washington Post, saying it, but other senior administration officials have told journalists in the past. There was another story you remember a while ago. We told them this is a factory, they're making IEDs, you need to arrest these guys, and those guys, we saw them scrambling away. Do you think that mistrust has now narrowed?
Well, maybe a bit, just because bilateral ties have improved significantly in the last few months. But certainly, it's still there. And I think this mistrust issue is going to be one of the factors keeping the two sides from getting closer together on looking for some ways to cooperate on the drones issue. I mean, this whole issue, this allegation that Pakistani security establishment has tipped off militants before drones can get to them. This is the same thing that happened. The same dynamic was behind what happened with the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound. The United States did not trust the Pakistanis, which is why it didn't tell them in advance. So this mistrust has been there a long time. This didn't just appear in 2011. It goes back decades. The bilateral relationship is a complex one. It's had good moments, but it's also had very difficult moments. And it's going to take a number of years and probably different leaderships in both countries over a period of years for all of this mistrust and this legacy of hostility to disappear. So certainly things have improved, but I think it's important to emphasize that we're a long way away from it going away completely.
Hence the challenges. So, Shuja, given the mistrust, both sides have said at the end of the meeting, one thing that they've come out with is that they need to cooperate on counterterrorism. What can they cooperate on?
Well, I think in the end, it's really not what the two sides can do, but it's Pakistan that has to take the first and most important step, which is to have a very unequivocal stance on terrorism and militancy inside its own borders. I think the Prime Minister's instincts have been quite right on that. He's opened, using the all-parties conference, he's opened the possibility of a dialogue. But that dialogue must be preceded by recognition from the militants that they recognize the writ of the authority of the state and that they recognize the constitution of Pakistan, that that's not going to be a fundamental change in that. Secondly, he will need to act against all militants, not just the ones in the border region, militants in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and in the Punjab.
Southern Punjab.
And he will need assistance, and that is where the US and other allies can help, because Pakistan doesn't have the wherewithal, the infrastructure, nor the experience with de-radicalization programs. And there are countries in Asia, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, that can assist. And the US can certainly help in putting that effort together.
How will he suffer internally or deal with the internal politics? His party is alleged to have links with some of these groups, electoral help. Some of his ministers have been seen riding around in cars with suspect people. How will he deal with that?
Well, there are different ways of dealing with that. And the military force is not the only answer, nor should it be the primary possibility. I think economics has a lot to do with it. And some of his other ideas, such as opening borders with India, opening trade possibilities with Central Asia, with Afghanistan, and with India, also offer great opportunities for changing the landscape inside the Punjab. So instead of people not having anything to do and becoming a recruitment pool for the militancy and for the ideology, which is taking root very firmly, it's not pure economics. It's very critical that he changes that landscape in a way that it removes the militancy from inside Pakistan.
Now, Michael, one thing that is very important is that we were told by senior US administration officials that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif emphasized that the economy of Pakistan is linked to security, and security is linked to relationships with India and Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. How is that being looked upon, and how will that play in the politics of the region?
Well, it gets back to the old question, what comes first? Economics, can better economic situations improve the overall security situation, or do you need better security to have economic development? It's a tough call in Pakistan, though. I would argue, and the US government has certainly argued, that until Pakistan gets its security situation more stable, it's going to be very difficult to focus on economic development.
But do you think it's very interesting, I'm sorry for interrupting, that a Pakistani prime minister is linking directly internal security of the country to relationships with India and Afghanistan?
Absolutely, and for good reason. It makes good sense, and I think you could look at Punjab, for example. I mean, militancy in Punjab is very different from militancy in Fatah and the tribal areas, because you have groups that not only, as you said, are alleged to have some connections to the ruling party, but also have some sort of or a clear connection with India, in the sense that these Punjab groups are anti-India groups. Lashkar-e-Taiba, etc. And India has said that it really wouldn't, or suggested that it would be difficult to think about reconciling with Pakistan until the Nawaz Sharif-led government takes a stronger line on dealing with these Punjab-based anti-India militant groups that in many cases operate with impunity. So, and as Shuja was saying before, this doesn't involve dealing with military force. There doesn't need to be a military offensive. There would never be a military offensive in Punjab. But really, all there needs to be is focus on law enforcement, better policing, more arrests, more prosecutions. Making changes like that, focusing on those types of reforms, could make a huge difference in terms of affecting the militancy situation, and then from that, you could be in a better position to think about economic progress and relations with India. What
I found very interesting in the Prime Minister's briefing after the meeting with the President was he came out and said, yes, we were asked about Jamaat-ud-Dawa, Hafiz Saeed, and the Mumbai attacks and why the trials aren't going forward. How important is it that he's publicly accepting it, and what do you think he's going to do about it now that they're discussing it at such a high level?
Well, as Michael said, you obviously have to change the legal structures and regulations which are antiquated in both India and Pakistan. Mm-hmm. The problems that Pakistan faces in prosecuting, collecting evidence and presenting it in the courts are exactly the same problems that India is facing also. Pakistan has now made some efforts at trying to change those laws, trying to accelerate the procedures, and trying to use regulation without having to get bogged down in new resolutions before the parliament. So I think they're on the right path. It's just that they shouldn't waver. It's very critical. Domestic investment is the first thing that is affected by unrest. Once domestic investment begins, then foreign direct investment can also begin. So the chicken and egg situation that Michael referred to obviously persists, but it's possible to change that dynamic by creating domestic investment opportunities. Then foreign investors also come in. Just a very simple indication of how serious the issue is affecting US-Pakistan relations. The US has shut down its consulate in Lahore. It's one of the most important offices of the United States. Punjab is the largest province in terms of the economy and population. For the US to shut it down because of what we are called are very credible and persisting threats means that they have to be Punjab-based. And so that is something, if I was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, I would put as a #1 priority to get the consulate open and then to see if we can get more Americans actually visiting Pakistan to see what their business opportunities are, rather than meeting people in Dubai and taking their word for it that they've got enough wherewithal to produce for the US market.
How important is Hafiz Saeed and Jamaat Ad-Dawa in this India-Pakistan and now US relationship? Is this going to be something that the Pakistani government's seriousness and their honesty is going to be measured against? Because both US and India have said on the record and off the record, we have given you evidence, act upon it.
Yeah, certainly the Hafiz Saeed legal situation is a critical issue. India has been bringing it up for a number of years, as it should be, given that it would seem that there's very clear evidence of his involvement in the Mumbai attacks. So certainly this issue, the specific issue of Hafiz Saeed, will be very closely connected to India-Pakistan, the future of India-Pakistan reconciliation, and certainly in terms of US relations with Pakistan. I was actually a bit surprised that President Obama, and not only President Obama, other officials brought this up in meetings with Nawaz Sharif. But certainly this is something that's critical. But it's not just Hafiz Saeed himself, but what he stands for. And this gets to what we were talking about before, this issue of anti-India militancy in Pakistan that so often operates with impunity. Even though the government in Pakistan has claimed that it wants to try to get things right, or at least to try to move toward reconciliation with India. So it's sort of looks, the optics of it are very unusual, or are very tricky, in that you have Nawaz Sharif saying, I really want to get things to work with India, and yet you have this huge 800-pound elephant in the room of the situation with the JUD and other anti-India militant groups in Punjab, in the political bastion, political heartland of the PMLN party.
Operating openly, appearing on the media. How should Pakistan deal with this issue?
Well, I think there's no other way but to take a very strong legal approach. As I said, they've already taken some steps to improving the laws and the regulations relating to terrorism legislation and the prosecution of cases. The police force has to be improved considerably because collection of evidence is critical. And then you also have to provide security to the people that are doling out justice.
Can they do something particularly about Hafiz Saeed in the short term? You're talking about a long term, maybe 5 years.
No, I'm not talking of long term. I think this is something with the current changes that they've instituted, they can go in and begin the prosecutions. And it's a matter of the law. Hafiz Saeed and his people have to present their evidence as defendants. They should have every right to present their evidence. And the government should present its evidence without any fear that its people will be attacked or that judges will be forced to flee the country, as has happened in at least one case.
Okay, now, I'm also very interested in what Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif said, Michael, not just when he was in New York in front of the Pakistani community, but also when he was in DC, when he was in front of the Pakistani community. Just some of the things he said, I jotted them down so I wouldn't forget. He said, well, if the whole world's saying it's our fault, and he was talking about terrorism vis-a-vis India, etc., then maybe it is our fault. Maybe we should look at ourselves. He said something about we need to put our house in order. He said we need to think about why anytime we're trying to engage with India constructively, there is some trouble. He particularly mentioned LOC before the New York meeting. What do these comments indicate to you?
Well, these are very significant. The fact that he's making such comments it really represents a sea change in that you have a top leader or the prime minister in Pakistan who is not trying to outsource blame, not trying to deny what's going on, essentially taking stock, taking responsibility, taking ownership of its challenges. I think that's a very, very important thing to consider. Now, of course, one wonders would he make such statements elsewhere? Would he say these things in Pakistan? Was there some intent to try to just exude goodwill, so to speak, while in Washington and try to impress his audience here, which I think he did. People around here seem to be very impressed with how he performed in terms of his public comments and public remarks. But I think this is significant because Pakistan, as I think we've discussed already, if it's to move beyond and get through its challenges, it really needs to take ownership and acknowledge that it faces a lot of issues that only it can handle and address ultimately, that it can't depend on aid from any other country. These are all short-term measures. So I think that the fact that he's saying we need to get our house in order, it's a very critical point, and I think it's to be applauded.
Should he say that in Pakistan? And if he does, what kind of problems can he run into?
He should say it, but he didn't need to. I mean, we're now on a global stage. Every single word, every action of his that could be tracked by the media was being tracked and reported on and commented on live in Pakistan 24/7. The number of media calls from Pakistan around the clock indicate that. So I don't think you can bifurcate the audiences any longer. So everything that he says is now on the record. And the question now is, can he walk the walk when he gets back? That will mean asserting civilian supremacy over the military, going through the transition of the new military command, going through the transition of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Pakistan, and then looking for opportunities to reopen the discussions with India. I would hope before the elections, because Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has an opportunity to leave a legacy, and that's the leverage that Prime Minister Sharif needs. On the US side, I think it's very critical also that the US strengthen the position that it took during this visit, which is that the US is committed to the long haul with Pakistan, and that the Kerry Lugar-Berman legislation was the first indication of that. But we also know that only 3.5 billion of the Kerry Lugar-Berman money, which was 7.5 billion ending next year, only 3.5 billion has actually been dispersed. So there will be an opportunity for the US to carry forward that money. And I've understood now that Congress did not put a limit to it. So there's an opportunity for the US to declare that this money will continue to be available so long as Pakistan provides the counterpart funds and the projects that are deemed
so let me understand that, because our understanding was that Kerry Lugar-Berman is for 5 years, $7.5 billion. You're now saying it's not limited to 5 years and it's not limited to 7.5 billion?
The disbursement cycle can go beyond 2014. The money can be appropriated, so there are ways in which you can decide what to do with it, but that money could then flow into Pakistan. It will be in the pipeline beyond 2014. That's a very real possibility.
But the amount is 7.5 billion.
7.5, which is not a big amount for Pakistan, by the way.
Right.
We should say that Pakistanis from abroad send 14 billion a year last year to Pakistan. So 7.5 over 5 years is not huge, but it's much bigger than anything the US had provided. And the image that the US wanted to create was one of consistency. And remember also, even in 2011, when conditions between the US and Pakistan were really awful, the aid money continued to be in the pipeline. It never stopped.
Now, Michael, Kashmir comes up. Pakistan has requested US to be the mediator. India has, of course, said it won't. US has, of course, said it doesn't want to get involved in the middle. How can US help?
This is a very tough one. The United States certainly wants there to be India-Pakistan reconciliation. Certainly, it's one of its chief goals in South Asia, and certainly sees this issue of Kashmir as being a big part of that. But I think for reasons that are pretty clear, this is a very sensitive, delicate matter, and we know that India really sees this as an issue that's already been resolved. And I think that Washington is always thinking about its relationship with India and wanting to be very careful about how it broaches this subject. So for that reason, when Prime Minister Sharif brought it up and we're told asked for some type of intervention from Washington, Obama really didn't get into that much. I think that to the extent that there's going to be movement here, it would be very much behind the scenes. The U.S. would, if it were to do anything to try to bring the two countries together and to talk about this issue, it would be done very privately. It would not be done in front of cameras and not on public stages at all. I think that's something that's foremost on the mind of Washington. But we've seen what's been happening on the line of control for much of this year, and really just over the last few days. It's hot once again. There's a lot going on there, and it's going to have something's going to have to give.
Now, why does Pakistan think that even if the U.S. becomes a mediator, gets involved, it'll get involved on Pakistan's side, given U.S.'s increasingly better relationship with India?
Well, Pakistan has always overestimated its leverage over the U.S. because of its strategic location, and you can't blame them for that because history is on their side. Every time there's trouble in the region, the U.S. comes to Pakistan and says, let's sign you up. In fact, if you go back to the 1986 Politburo meeting of the Soviet Union that Gorbachev pulled together to decide on exit from Afghanistan 2 years hence, one of the things he says is, let's go to Pakistan, which means it's next door. It's very critical. I mean, you have a country bordering China, India, Afghanistan, Iran, and overlooking the mouth of the Gulf. So you can't remove it from its geography. So that's why Pakistan thinks that it would benefit. But I think there's a big change that has occurred in the last decade or so. The U.S. now has a strategic partnership with Afghanistan, with Pakistan, and with India. And as a strategic partner, as Michael was saying, it can use moral suasion and quiet diplomacy to have them talk to each other as one friend advising another friend. The U.S. is not going to put pressure on India or on Afghanistan. Similarly, I think it's very critical for the U.S. and Pakistan to have their conversations behind closed doors and not through the public media.
And we don't even have enough time, but I'll just briefly touch on this. Afghanistan, the withdrawal. What were U.S. expectations? What do you think U.S. expects from Pakistan in 2014? And what can Pakistan deliver?
Well, I mean, this is both countries, Pakistan and the United States, really share a common interest in Afghanistan. And they both want Afghanistan to be more stable than it is now. And I think that the White House really is looking to Pakistan to use what the U.S. has described as Pakistani influence over the Afghan Taliban to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table, to try to jumpstart some sort of negotiation to end the war, which of course there have been several false starts so far. But this is not, there are really a lot of assumptions here that I think need to be examined. One is, does Pakistan really have that influence over the Afghan Taliban? Two, is the Taliban in fact interested in talking now? We're hearing in recent days that there's concern that the Taliban is going to actually think about fighting this winter. Usually there's not much fighting over the winter, but there's concern that's going to happen from the U.S. side. And this could be a fresh point of tension here. I mean, we've been seeing Afghanistan, not Afghanistan writ large, but this issue of working together, Pakistan and the U.S. working together to get people to the negotiating table, see that as a point of convergence, and yet not necessarily. So this is going to be lingering. But I think it's important to emphasize that despite the divergent interest and the hostility and the mistrust, I really do think that both countries, Pakistan and the U.S., want the war in Afghanistan to end
and a stable
soon.
Afghanistan. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad I was able to at least touch on it, because that's it for us. Our time is up. I really need to thank our guest, Michael Kugelman, who's the Senior Program Associate for South and Southeast Asia at the Wilson Center, and Shuja Nawaz, the Director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. I also want to thank all of you for watching. Don't forget to send your questions, your comments, your suggestions, and until next time, goodbye.